It's time, folks, to get back to basics. And we're talking the most fundamental of fundamentals today on Hitting with Holly, including knowing to touch first base when you're intentionally walked before you're lifted for a pinch runner. We will get into that and much more today on Hitting with Holly with Todd Hollandsworth today. And Holly, it's getting late in the year. Obviously, we got about a little over a month to go in the regular season. And, I know it's a long season. I know mistakes happen along the way, but there are certain things foundationally that have to be executed. And before I, kind of refresher to our audience what I'm talking about, to Marlin fans, they'll know because last Sunday there was an incident against the Cubs, and granted, the Marlins won 7-2, so everyone was all happy down here in South Florida. However, the most basic of basics was not executed, and we're going to discuss that among other topics. And that is in the eighth inning with the big league, Jesus Sanchez of the Marlins is intentionally walked by the Cubs. These days, you just issue four fingers. They go to first. You don't have to execute four balls to get the runner to first. But the base runner has an obligation to touch first base. Well, late in the game, the Marlins going to pinch run and make a defensive substitution with Christian Pache. He's going to come in, run for Sanchez, and stay in the game to play the outfield. Well, what happens is somewhere along the line, about 85 feet down the line, bases, of course, are 90 feet, Sanchez stops. He's kind of caught up in the commotion. He turns around, heads back to the Marlins dugout. First base coach John Jay, video shows, he's just standing there. And meanwhile, Sanchez goes back. Pache comes in. And then they show the highlight. The camera goes to the Cubs dugout, and Craig Counsell, the manager of the Cubs, like, wait a minute, goes out, tells the umpire he didn't touch first base. They appeal over at first. Sanchez is out. Marlins go on, win the game. Skip Schumacher does the right thing. Afterward, he accepts blame, but it's kind of glossed over. And why I'm making a big deal over it and why we're not letting it go is when you're more than 85 losses, whatever they are, 85, 86 losses, before September, you better be fundamentally sound in all areas. If you're 20, 30 games over and have a brain fart, you're going to get away with a little bit more. But this is why we're getting back to basics. And we're going to bring Todd Hollandsworth in. I want Holly's thoughts to see if I'm hitting too hard on this or is this something valid? Because I think there's certain level of unacceptability and accountability that this needs to be drilled, and we got a young audience that follows our channel. And you guys and girls out there that are playing baseball and softball and such need to know the basic rules.
Yeah, and it's a very good point, Joe. I mean, and I agree with you 100%. I think that, if we were, assessing blame for this particular play, the first place my mind goes is that there's a lot of accountability for a lot of people. Of course, the player, Jesus, you'd love to believe that, he knows the rules and that, he's obviously got to make his way to first base and touch it. We've all been there. I've been there myself. I've done it. You run down, you got to touch first base. If there's a pinch runner, if you're the pinch runner, I've done it on both sides of it before. So I know that, but I guess, without kind of honing in too much on the actual specifics of what happened, which, I think in a lot of people's minds is really not that big a deal, it does kind of take me to a place which I've spoken on many, many times, and you and I speak about it quite often. What our players are being raised to understand and how much control that these players have in a lot of ways maybe forfeited to organizations and to, kind of just glossing over things because they're being fed so much information. They're being kind of told what to do. And, I speak to it constantly, I generally speak to it usually in terms of outfield defense because of how we were raised to do it. And I think it's just such a great example of understanding the game, understanding, your responsibility as a player. And then, that responsibility going back into the dugout to the manager, into the coaches, into the front office, and all the accountability that goes in there. And so, I'll just speak on it in terms of outfield defense, really. We were raised, your center fielder's in charge. He understands what's going on. He's got a clear view of what's going on behind home plate. He sees what the catcher's doing. He sees the swings better than your corner outfielders. And so there was always a level of responsibility that the center fielder had each and every day. It didn't matter who was out there. It didn't matter if it was your fourth outfielder playing center field that day or your starter, your regular center fielder. He was in control, and he had the responsibility of really the other two outfielders, the left fielder and the right fielder. So if he was going to move, he was always going to communicate that movement based on what he's seeing and the swing that he's seeing or the velocity that's coming out of your pitcher's hand and what's going on. It's the flow of the game. But again, we're kind of honing in on the feel of the game and understanding the game and playing the game, but playing the game as a team and playing the game as a unit. And what has kind of happened to many of our kids, and this is where I tend to excuse Jesus just a little bit, because if he didn't know, he didn't know. But at the same time, we're kind of raising these kids where we want to take their ability to learn the game and to know the game. In some ways, we've taken that away from them because we've just filled them with information, and we've kind of told them, we're going to tell you everything that you need to know, and we're going to tell you everything to do. So if it's going to continue to be that way, you're probably going to continue to see more mistakes like this because the players are going to trust that the people who are in charge are going to relay all of that information that has to be, in the moment, sometimes in game preparation, after the game, however, you're divvying up all that information. It's going to be handed to you as opposed to you actually knowing the game and, having the flow of the game and learning how this game works. So I think that there's a lot of responsibility that goes around. You kind of mentioned John Jay over at first base. I'm sure John's answer would be, how did he not know that? At the same time, Jesus's response probably in some ways is, but I didn't. And he's also got Pache running out there at the same time. And so, you've got a little bit of a confusion here, but it really just does speak to an overarching problem that I've spoken to many times. I mean, we talk about it constantly in hitting. Yeah. All of this control, all of this, do it this way. Don't teach yourself how to do it your way, which I think is doing many of our players an injustice because, again, so much of what makes our game great is not just learning the game, your skill sets, running the bases, playing good defense, understanding when to throw the ball, when not to throw the ball, how to throw the ball, high throws, low throws. I mean, we can go on and on and on about all that stuff, but there's that other part of the game, which is just, understanding what you're supposed to be doing, and it's learning the game, not just for yourself, but for your teammates and understanding it as a group. So, part of this does kind of feed into that control that, the front offices want to have. They want to, just tell everybody where to stand. And it's so interesting because, again, just bringing up outfield defense real quick, there were very few times in my career, and I was in the big leagues for over 1,000 big league ball games, over 12 years, lots of different guys in the outfield. I played left, center, and right. There weren't very many, many times where we were getting instructions from the dugout where it was like, okay, we need to take control here because you guys aren't picking up on what we want. Where today, that's really all I see. Guys don't move really as much unless there's somebody in the dugout, their outfield coach or whoever's got them moving, and then collectively they're almost looking in. And it's kind of what we've become. And that's a little bit of what we saw in that little gaff that we saw the other day, even as simple as an intentional walk.
Yeah, and I'm kind of glad you mentioned some points because it reinforces where I was on this and on the broader picture of everything's written down in a card. And everything's on an iPad, and players are in the dugouts, and they could get mad at me for saying that, that the managers and coaches and players don't have their heads in iPads all game, but clearly they do, or at least, obviously not every second, but clearly a lot of time there. Right. And when you're literally being told, like you say, the card says move one step over, the card says, whatever the card says, and it got back to where we had the discussion about football, baseball, where a football player has to read the audibles. They got to know like 1,000 things. If you're on the defensive line, the substitutions coming in, new formats, and the quarterback's audibling, and guys are moving all over the place, and they have to know what to do on the spot. Baseball, it's become so much, as you note, being controlled by the front offices, being controlled by they think they can build the player. They got it backwards. The players are the game.
Right.
Now they got it where the front offices are the game. And I'll take this to the point where we talked a little bit about Kyle Stowers last week, the left-handed hitter. I was noting who the guy is a part of from the Orioles as part of the Trevor Rogers trade. And Stowers had that long swings, a lot of strikeout in there. And then he, big exit velocity, big bat speed guy, but really shortening up his swing. And now all of a sudden, he gets like 3 hits yesterday or something. He's been hot, and the power, yeah, he hit a homer, but the headlines are the adjustments are starting to work. As if it's not the player, it's what we're telling. See, you're not a good player unless you do what we tell you to do. Forget the fact you're playing a Coors Field against a terrible pitching staff. The day before against Kyle Freeland, you did nothing because you're not doing left on left. You don't score. The Marlins get shut down there. It still comes down to some basic stuff where I think it's to the point where all praise is adjusting. All of it. How many times do you hear with the Marlins? They don't develop hitters in the minor leagues. And I always countered, they didn't have hitters to develop. So you always put this expectation on your farm director. Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, I know players do get better and development's a big part of it. But there are a lot of players that have become great big leaguers without good development because, frankly, they didn't have great development. They just happen to be great players. So I think there's obviously a balance here where, for an organization like the Marlins, who don't want to obviously pay players, and they make every player interchangeable. So their system, I think they're trying to become like the Patriots, is it Belichick? Is it Brady? Is it the system? Is it the quarterback? It's almost like they're trying to do that with baseball, where it's our system that's going to bring out the best in you, not just who you are as a player. And because I'm still of the belief, a scout, an evaluator evaluates the player, and those grades matter more to me than an exit velocity, which they tried to define the player.
I think of, my mind, a lot of things start running, and I'll keep it real simple. I learned more from guys I played with than, and this isn't a knock on the great hitting coaches that I had. I had great hitting coaches. I was blessed. I mean, of course, I played in a different time in a different space. A lot of my coaches, all of my coaches, almost all of them were, former big leaguers and former, great hitters, not always, Hall of Famers, but guys that had success at the major league level. And it kind of defined who they were in that they were good enough to, obviously find success at the major league level. And now they were willing to give you their heart and soul to tell you how they did it, but how it actually applies to you. Because I do find it so interesting because, as you were kind of talking about that, I thought of 3 guys that I do talk about quite a bit. 2 of them happen to be Yankees just because I think they're having incredible seasons and they're stars in our sport. Aaron Judge, Juan Soto. And, I was just thinking about how unique they are in their approach to the game. And I know for a fact that as a player, you have to be the one that dips your toe in the water to find out what you can capably do at this game at the highest of levels and what you're going to do. And it's so funny because you mentioned the success, right? Like he's starting to make the adjustments. Well, I mean, that's what good coaches do. Good coaches are going to help you understand what adjustments ultimately you have to make. So I do believe that there's credit that has to go in that direction. But at the same time, you have to remember the player is the one who's executing the adjustments and the player is the one that's ultimately getting the results. And what I will also speak to at this moment is this. Organizations, all of them. I don't care whether we're talking about baseball, football, business, you name it. When the organization succeeds as a whole, they're going to want the credit for it. That's generally how it works. But I can promise you this, especially because I see it all the time and I've talked to enough, ex-teammates, ex-players, friends of mine, guys, all of us who have played, who live down here in South Florida. they're going to leave you high and dry the minute it goes south. You know what I'm saying? Like, so that's the other thing that you have to understand, even as a young player. You need to understand that you have to be the one that stands on your own 2 feet, and you're going to be held accountable for the results that you put out there on the field. Now, granted, we're all pulling for you to be great, but what I'm trying to tell our listeners is that when it does start to go south just a little bit, we have kind of moved away from helping the younger players and allowing them to struggle through their problems, knowing that on the other side of that struggle, there could be a lot of success because this particular individual might be immensely talented or he does something particularly well. And the problem that we have is that we no longer really play by those rules. You get your opportunity, you better make the most of it. And if you don't, you're going to get DFA'd before you know it. You may get DFA'd in your second year. You may get DFA'd in your third year. I mean, I'm the perfect person really to speak to this because, you know, my first half of my career was up and down all across. Big year, bad year, big year, medium year. You know, I kind of did it all. And, but through it all, my coaches were incredibly loyal. And that's what I trusted the most was their voice, because whether I was 10 for my last 21 or 2 for my last 20 with, 6 strikeouts, they were the same guys that I showed up to work with every day. So I knew that their intentions were there. And I don't want to get to where it sounds like I'm speaking to the intentions of the coaches like they don't care, because I believe that they do, but it's also how they're being taught how to coach. You see what I'm saying? And so that actually matters. And these kids at the end of the day, we're just seeing so much of this where the kid gets up, he gets called up, he struggles just a little bit, boom, he's off everybody's radar, just like bam, that fast. Yeah. And that's the unfortunate part of this. At the end of the day, you have to stand on your own 2 feet. You have to be able to say, okay, this is my career. I'm going to take hold of it. This is who I'm going to be. And whatever journey I end up going on, I'm going to be okay with it. Because, when you hear a young player say, boy, I really wished that I would have done things differently and taken more control of what I could control. And then you get to the end of the story and it doesn't turn out the way that the player wanted it to turn out. Your heart goes for them, because you're like, well, that's you're part of the system now. And it's like, that's kind of how the system's in play. And that's what you're a victim of.
Yeah. You mentioned some points, and when I'm looking down, I'm looking at some data, some notes I basically have on my phone, and I'm getting down to, Holly, I think it gets to priority. It's like we have an understanding of the game. And I know, again, our audience, we have a lot of kids, high school kids and so forth. And I'm a firm believer, be a student of the game, whatever you get, if you get into journalism, if you go into whatever field you are, be a student of that. Get to know it. And by doing that, you're talking it, you're passionate about it, you're pointing out little observations in advance. You're noticing, I can't tell you the number of stories I got by me just watching players, whether it's spring. That's why I love spring training. I could go there, I could watch habits, I could watch what you're doing. If something seemed a little bit different than off the course, I'd go up to a player. Hey, what were you working on, or whatever? And you might get this really interesting story. And I guess at least to me, it was interesting. But it's not interesting to some of the big picture people. And I'm looking here, and I noted, and we go a lot of ways here, but Marlins win yesterday, 12-8, typical Coors shootout. Derek Hill, God bless him, he hits 2 homers for the Marlins in this game. One in the second inning, but on the app, along with the home run, it notes 1-0 Miami at the time in the second inning. Miami win probability 60.8%. Okay, Holly, we go to the 6th inning. Kid hits his second homer in the game. Derek Hill once again. Marlins up 10-6. Now that 4-run lead. Marlins win probability 91.9%. Point being, instead of us talking about guys knowing the rules enough to touch first base on an intentional walk, we're educating our fans. It's becoming a bigger priority, and you see it. You're an broadcaster and analyst. You're seeing on TV, everything is in a percentage. Everything is in a win probability. Everything is but where's that coming from too? The Marlins have 100% analytics or front office. So how they indoctrinate, they're not listening to me. They're not listening to what you're saying right now. They're listening to, look, how many times do you see the chart? The guy gets up 45% to the third base side, 22% to the shortstop side, 4% to the first base side. And so everything is quantified. So what happens is you have a fan base now that sits there, sees everything in numbers. So they're like, why are you going on and on about not touching first? It's no big deal. They won the game. Yet, we're just pointing to a probability, and put your money in here. And who cares what your win probability is in the first inning or second inning of a 1-0 game?
But you see what ends up happening, Joe, and all of that is that we've now taken the emotion out of the game. We've taken the heart out of the game, and we've removed responsibility from the players themselves. And that is one of the biggest problems that I see, and that's really where it goes. I think back to when I was broadcasting, the many years I was broadcasting, and I remember vividly, whether I was in Chicago or here in Miami, talking to different hitters at different times. Now, of course, when you're in a good space, I'll talk about the hitters. When you're in a good space, you're around the cage watching batting practice, and the guy's raking. There's a fun, excitement for the game. You see them working their mechanics and what they're looking to do that day. But when you see a hitter struggling, and he's struggling on the field, but you don't necessarily see it translate emotionally. And maybe, I'm clearly speaking for myself here. When I was struggling, I was mad. I was angry. I was getting it right. You know what I mean? Like I was grinding. Like I was working. I wasn't telling jokes. I wasn't like, I guess really what I'm saying is a lot of times you go to the cages now and you watch batting practice, you can't even differentiate between the guys who are hot and the guys who are cold, because almost like the accountability or the responsibility has been somehow lifted. And I just remember back in the day, you'd go out, we would have early batting practice, usually at the front end of a series. If you have a 3-game series, you go on the road, there would be early batting practice at 2:00. If I was with the Dodgers, we were going to San Diego. The first game that we would play in San Diego, usually that day, which would almost always be a night game, obviously, and you would have early batting practice around 2:00. And so we would go out on the field at 2:00, guys who were struggling, generally speaking, and guys who were looking to work on things. And so it's just, I don't know if our kids, because so much of that responsibility has been taken off of them because of the control, and this is what we're looking for, this is the game plan we need for you to execute. The feel of the game has just really gone away, and that's the unfortunate part of what I see more times than not. It's just the sense, the feel, all of the things that go into a game, that go into each and every moment, each and every pitch. How many times I've said to a teammate, man, I've got it. I feel like I'm right there. It wasn't me saying that after I went, 3 for my last 5. It was saying prior to the 5, I found it. I know that I'm there. And so that's all about that. That's coming from the inside. That's not coming from the outside. That's not an iPad. That's not this is what we're looking for. This is the game plan. Go out and execute it. This is me taking batting practice and me finding the barrel a lot more consistently than I was finding it a couple of days ago. And that's kind of my point, is that we've gotten away from that so much because we've gotten so centered on the numbers. And you want to know why fans today are so different in their passion towards the game, because they see it too. They know that there's a lot of control. They know that these players are doing exactly what they're told to be doing. And it alleviates, it takes away that responsibility for the things that go right and the things that go wrong in a game.
It's funny you talk about that. Now the word load management is, the term has come into the sport last few years. And a lot of the scouts I know, and they'll openly talk about, at the minor league level, they go in there to scout players, and obviously they like to watch BP to kind of get a feel for what players do in BP and how they go about their business. And they're like, there's no one on the field. They don't, they take BP in the cages. If at all, they're more worried about, getting their rest so it's clearly not worked on. And so obviously it's not prioritized.
And, here's the best part about the whole thing. And here's why I know, and I'm not saying this I say this as humbly as I can say this. You know how I know that I'm right? Because the numbers don't lie.
Yeah.
The numbers don't lie. And it's the basic numbers that we talk about, the drop in batting average, the fact that home runs are hit by a small percentage of our guys in the sport. You almost get the sense that, like, the 20 homer guy has gone away. It's you're either hitting 50 or you're not. And it's just, you have just such separation there. But the numbers, it's funny, they want to use them as evidence all the time. Well, the numbers aren't lying. The numbers don't lie. When you take the heart and soul out of something, it becomes robotic. And when it becomes robotic, you emotions, God gave us these great emotions for good and, to drive us. It wasn't, I was driven by failure a lot. I mean, you learn to live Major League Baseball being driven by your failure, probably more than your success. I never was Juan Soto, and I certainly wasn't Aaron Judge, but you understood that there were going to be the ups and the downs and the highs and the lows. Now, I was probably a lot more fun to be around, just like 100% of all Major League hitters are a lot more fun to be around when they're 10 for their last 20 with a couple of home runs. But when they're 2 for 20, you would expect that they're probably a little bit more somber, a little bit more reserved, and a little bit more focused on getting out of the funk that they're in, because they want to get it right. And they know that they're being held responsible. It's so interesting to me. I guess I'll give you an example, just because it's right off the top of my head, and I saw it last night, because I've always enjoyed watching this guy play. He's a really good player. He's a lot like me in terms of who he is on the field, and his name's Tommy Pham. Now, Tommy was a grinder. This is a guy who's had highs and lows. He's had the in-betweens, but everything about this dude plays hard. We know he plays the game the right way. He gets to St. Louis, right? He goes, I think, his first 8 or 10 ball games, hot as a firecracker. Everybody in St. Louis is like, he's back. Tommy's back. Yeah. He's going to have some great impact for us. He's going to help us get to where we want to be. And so for the first couple of weeks, you're seeing, okay, Tommy's found it. And then all of a sudden he swoons a bit. I don't know, whatever the numbers were, 3 or 4 for his last 30 or 40 or whatever it was. But there are, I think he was DFA'd, you know what I'm saying? And It's like, see what I'm saying? You see, the word that comes to my mind is cutthroat. And it's like, that's how it's become. We want you to trust the system, because the system will take care of you and the system has the answers. But if you fail, it's all on you. It's on you, and you are going to be the one that's going to be held responsible for it. So what does that tell you as a player? Well, you want to take responsibility for all of my success, because you want to say that the system works, or we're raising our kids the right way, we're raising our minor leaguers the right way, and we're going to do things this way. That's all fine and dandy when it turns out well and everybody's benefiting. But the minute that you start to slump or you start to struggle, you're getting DFA'd. I've said it twice now, 3 times.
No, that's
really what ends up happening.
No, that's a really, really good take, Holly. And there are 2 points I wanted to get to. The second one you touched on, I should get on now. And I was looking at this. Because I verse myself in the numbers as well. That's what these people, the analytics people, don't realize is people with more of a baseball mind, we got to look at the numbers too. And we could prioritize however we want to prioritize. And I'm looking, and you're getting into the point where Derek Jeter noted this several times, that it's a game of failure.
Yeah.
That seems to be lost on these decision makers. So this is how an Alex Gonzalez could be like 2 for 40, whatever, in the playoffs back in 2003, and then homer off Weaver in extra innings to put the Marlins up 3-2 because Jack McKeon believed in him to stick with his guy. But it's not just the Alex Gonzalez has done it. Great call by Boog Chambi back in the day. But last year, Yandy Diaz of the Tampa Bay Rays was having, he had like 330, is having an MVP. He was in the MVP conversation.
Yeah.
Well, this year, Wander Franco's not there anymore because of what he did, and you lose a premier player. Rays aren't the same Rays. Yandy's hitting, I don't have his number, but he's in about 270. But I screen grabbed this. In terms of Fangraphs WAR, and this is a few days ago, so the numbers he may have moved up or down a little bit. 103, like he's the 103rd ranked position player based on WAR, but and Fangraphs, and with like a 1.1 WAR. And I'm looking from just like screen 97 through about 120. 119 in WAR is Luis Arraez. You're going to tell me he's the 119th best player in baseball. Jorge Soler's at 120. And JD Martinez is it's at like 99. Yandy, like I said, is at 103. And then Vinny Pasquantino, the big guy with Kansas City. They happened to be on early the other day, and I noticed he hit he homered or whatever. He has like about 20 homers now, 19, 20 homers. Really close, like 98, 99 RBIs. And everyone's like, I'm looking, if you look at the power numbers for a middle lineup guy, and I get it, there's much more that would define who a quality middle lineup guy is. But the Royals have a pretty good year. They're right there in the playoff hunt. This guy's got 20-ish homers, going to easily eclipse 100 RBIs, yet he's not viewed as highly in WAR. And point being, you look at, Corbin Carroll, last year's Rookie of the Year, dreadful first half. But now he had a key, grand slam to beat the Mets a couple of nights ago, hitting much better in the second half. To the point that you raise is, if you listen to a lot of these people, this list that includes George Springer, Ryan Mountcastle, JD Martinez, Michael Garcia of Kansas City, Yandy Diaz, Jeff McNeil, Vinny Pasquantino, Jesus Sanchez, who's at 106, Matt Olson. Matt Olson's the 108th best WAR guy. You tell me Matt Olson's a one-win. Point being is not everyone's going to perform at their peak all the time. So now you're basically flipping the sport. And this is why a couple of years ago, I had someone who's no longer in the Marlins organization, but he is on their analytics group, literally told me, we had a September discussion. This is year 2 of Jonathan India, who I'm a big fan of, with the Reds. And obviously he's from South Florida. And I like talking to the kid. He, rookie of the year, second year, dealt with injuries and the depleted Reds roster. He had a hammy. And the guy told me that Charles LeBlanc was as good as Jonathan India. And I said, no, he's not. And it's like, oh, yeah, he is. Look at the numbers. Well, you looked at a small sample size by LeBlanc, who I don't even know if he's in the big leagues anymore. And Jonathan India is a pretty solid everyday player. But because of the moment, the snapshot on the moment, are we going to say, JD Martinez can't play? I mean, give me a break.
Well, there's a lot of ways to describe everything that we're talking about here this morning. I mean, it really is. I mean, the first word that comes to mind is micromanaging. And that was a word that we laughed about all the time back when I played. And we thought it was very interesting because you managers knew not to judge guys based on 5 seconds. What have they done the last week? Okay, well, they're 2 for the last 20. So get them out of here. DFA them. I mean, it just, we didn't behave like that. The game didn't work like that. And so more trust was placed in the hands of the managers. The managers' responsibilities were to extract the best from their players, knowing that there were going to be lots of highs and lows. I mean, even the best teams in baseball have 1 or 2. If you're having a great year, I think of the Braves a couple of seasons ago, right? It just seemed like every guy in their lineup had an OPS over 800. It was like kind of a dream offensive season for everybody. And here you are, I think it was last year, right? So here we are a year later, and it's like Marcell Ozuna's carrying them on his shoulders. I mean, and he was the guy that, kind of had a decent year last year, good year, but probably was overlooked, with everybody else having these incredible seasons. And, here he is doing all the heavy lifting this year for them. Same dude. So my point is this, it's, and I've said it many times, and it's so obvious to my eyes. The only thing that protects the players now are long-term contracts, because now the organizations realize, okay, well, we saw the promise in this guy, or we brought him in and we gave him a 5-year deal. So that means that he's going to play in the lineup. He's going to be in the lineup every day. And so that's ultimately what's protecting him. you think it's funny because you brought up Corbin Carroll, who's very popular in my house. We've got lefties in my house. I've got one, very similar game. So we see a lot of him. And, as great as he was last year and as amazing as he was, and I said there's going to come a time where this kid's going to struggle. I didn't know it was going to be the beginning of the year, and for as long as he struggled. But through all of those struggles, the kid was working, he was grinding, and he was out there every day. That's kind of the thing. He was out there every day, and being out there every day, this will probably be, if this kid goes on and it finds himself in the Hall of Fame 20 years from now, Joe, he will probably make reference to this year as being one of the biggest steps forward he took as a baseball player and as a human being in understanding how to persevere when everything was not working, was not going in his favor, right? You're over your last 10, you get up there, you're trying to find it, and you line out to the second baseman, and you're like, it's just like nothing's going right. I've been there. You're grinding, you're working 2 hours in the cage before the game, and you go out there and you line out a couple of times that day and you take an 0 for 3, and all everybody sees is the 0 for 3, even though you knew that you had a much better day than that. You squared up the baseball twice, you did your part, you did what you were, went out to do that day, but you didn't get the results.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that, we just gotten to ourselves, baseball has gotten itself to a point where we've become micromanagers of everything that we see. Everything can be measured, balanced, unbalanced, and adjusted. And that's why every day you see 10, 15 guys DFA'd, let go, picked up, bouncing around. I mean, how many guys in the game right now have been on, 4 or 5 teams already this year? One individual, he's gone from here to here to here to here to here. And somehow and it's funny because I keep thinking, which one of these organizations is actually going to take a deep breath in and realize, okay, well, we gave him 10 at bats. That's probably not going to really define who he is in 10 at bats, yet you didn't get the results that you wanted and you're already ready to move on from him. So what I'm saying, it's like we've just become so, the control isn't on the field anymore. The control is somewhere else. And when that when that happens, I said you lose control, because that's it. What we see is what's on the field. And so the people, even the managers, are technically on the field. They're in the dugout. You know what I'm saying? It's like when that control changes, and the way that we measure and the way that we judge, and like when one of my favorite ones, Joe, and you always like, is, you'll hear every now and again, you'll hear this argument, guy doesn't have the numbers, his numbers are down or whatever, his OPS plus or whatever is, below league average. But they'll say, but he's hitting the ball really hard, which I'm all about him hitting the ball hard. That's the name of the game.
Yep.
But I'm sure if you talk to the guy, he's like, I want results. We used to talk about this all the time. And we had guys, Grud would not get mad at me for mentioning this, but I'll bring up Mark Resolana, because he was a friend of mine, and he was a good teammate, and he was a very good major league player, and he had a very nice career. Grud, he was one of the ugliest hitters you ever saw, but the dude hit. He got broken bat hits all the time. He was fast. He'd get infield hits. It wasn't always pretty, but it was always about the results. And I guess that's my point, is that the results mattered, and the results mattered to the players. But I don't think the results matter to the players nearly as much today as it did when we played, because we knew that we were just ultimately being held responsible for our results. So we were always searching for it. And that pursuit of the quality results is what drove us to get to the field at 2:00 that day and get out of the funk that we were in. That's what pushed us to be better ball players. That's what got us thinking outside the box. How can I be better? How can I take the extra base? How can I turn a single into a double? All of those things. And of course it applies to defense as well. But my point being is, we in a lot of ways have excused our players from this because we're honing in on exit velocity. Well, his exit velocity's gone up this year, 2 points, 2 miles per hour. He's hitting the ball harder, but he's hitting 50 points lower. So you see what I'm saying? It's like, okay, so wait a minute. So now we're having like a long-term discussion, because you're telling me that the potential is there, but you're ready to move on from the player because the results aren't there, but yet he's doing everything right. He's actually hitting the ball harder this year. See what I'm saying? So like, these poor kids, I see them. So many of them are confused even by the rules of engagement.
Well, I think it gets down to The organizations that do very well obviously have financial resources, so that's a given. But there's a loyalty,
Agreed.
there's a belief,
Right.
and there's a patience that I get. When you're marketing to an impatient society, and you have people that are making decisions that didn't play, not that you had to have played the game. Obviously, there are many, many successful GMs, Theo Epstein or whatever, but it's like that weren't on the field, that type of thing. People are in the sport left and right who didn't play it, at a highest of levels. But you at least those people have a understanding of the sport more than just, hey, we could be, banging on a guy for not touching first, but you know, if you could hit 280, but if you hit 240 with a slug of this, so sell out for slug, it's almost like the NBA 3-point thing. If you hit 3-pointers at this percentage, it's better than 2-pointers at this percentage. So as long as we have whatever the low bar is, just keep chucking up threes to have that. It becomes a percentage. And I just want to know, as a player, Holly, an ex-player, what's that mindset like? It must be much more reassuring. Obviously, at some point you have to produce, but when you're not in there having to worry about, hey, I went 0 for 8 in the last 2 games, I'm being buried, I'll never see the field again. Or if I'm in there, you better. What's that mindset? I can't imagine what the mindset of a player today is when you're dealing with the.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. No, I just was kind of jumping on your question because I mean, I feel it. I feel like a lot of the players today, they feel like they're absolved of responsibility, and they're not in a position where that accountability is the same. I mean, you see it all the time. I mean, a kid will get called up and he's already told that he'll only be facing right-handed pitching and only playing right field. And you're like, dude hasn't even gotten his first big league at bat yet, and we've already kind of keyholed him into what he is. And it's like, okay, how did we get here so fast? I'll use it as an example. I mean, I fell into the role myself. Jock Peterson's a great example of it. Jock, this was a kid who's got immense power. He's got a very keen eye at the plate. His skills have gotten better, but obviously he's awesome against right-handed pitching and not so good against left-handed pitching. But the journey in the story was he was given every opportunity all along the way, much like I was as I got later in my career and probably became more of a platoon guy, which I did. He understood the journey, but was given the opportunity to find out what he ultimately could be. He didn't really, he didn't get to the big leagues and say, okay, Jock, this is who you are. And he's been doing this forever. His first 6 years, even in Los Angeles, was we're marching this dude out there every day. This is our guy. We want him to learn how to hit left-handed pitching. We want to learn how, to be in the, we used to say this all the time. A lot of times you'll face a tough lefty knowing that you may get in a bat late in the ball game and you're one of our best guys against the closer. And you come up clutch constantly. Like we used to see that stuff all the time, but now that's been taken away because that player's not in the game or he's already been subbed out because the righty started and they took him out and they brought a lefty in and you took him out in the 6th inning to put your other guy in there. And then your backup guy ends up getting the big at bat in the 9th inning of a 2-2 ball game against the closer. And you're saying to yourself, boy, I wish Jock was still in the ball game. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, that's kind of where we've gotten to. Now there's always going to be some element of measuring that. Every good manager certainly understood that, but that's also understanding your roster. It's not a script. It's not, okay, this is what happens in the 1st inning. This is what happens in the 9th inning. And we don't ever go off script. That's kind of been the butting of heads that we've seen even between managers and front offices and some of the older school managers that have been managing the game through all of this over the last 20 years is that's in a lot of ways been taken away from them. But it's funny because as we've gravitated towards the front office wanting more control and less control in the dugout for the manager, we've now gotten back to, well, we kind of want those guys back. We want those guys back because they really resonate well with the players and they seem to get the most from them. They pull them out. And so all of a sudden we're having this wave of, some older managers, Bruce Bochy's and Bob Melvin's and Dusty Baker being around for, what I'm talking about, right? All of a sudden here we are. These guys are leading World Series championship caliber teams again. And we went through this era where we were like, okay, I don't even know that guy's name yet. He's the manager of the Padres. I've never heard of him. What's his resume? And it's, no offense. I'm just saying, their baseball history is very different than what we're used to hearing about. But in all of that, it really gets down to us understanding what this game was predicated on, and what we've snatched away from the game itself is the heart. And I've said it now in our last two conversations over the last few weeks, is that we've gotten away from the heart, and the heart is what made this game great. Whether you liked that guy or you hated that guy, whether you liked Ty Cobb or you didn't like Ty Cobb, you knew what you were going to get from Ty Cobb. And you got to have heroes and you got to have villains in this sport. And that's the best part about it. And that I used to always think all the time, like, when you're playing, when I was in Los Angeles and, the San Francisco Giants would come to town, Barry Bonds would step into the box, Barry'd get up there, and 65,000 people would go nuts. Like, they would boo him to death. Like, I mean, you'd hear it and you'd feel it and you're like, okay, these are my guys. This is my team and my town. And I think we've gotten to the point now where, Shohei Ohtani shows up wherever he is, and he truly is the superstar, even in visiting ballparks.
Yeah.
Am I making my point, or am I way off track here?
No. You're right. And
you know what I'm saying? Well, what is it? But that's also a reflection of what the game has become. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Shohei should go to San Francisco, and he should be public enemy number one up there, because that's what you want your fan base to be, loyal to the Giants. This is our team. This is our group. Boo, 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 boo. You're the enemy.
Correct. Yeah, you could appreciate the talent and you could applaud the superstar, but you ultimately want to beat that player that day. That's the goal. See, and I guess that's where this kind of heads to, does it matter? Why does it matter more to us? Why are we more passionate about the basics than they? And, you don't want to use the SEC. It means more, but it kind of does, to the people that invested much of their emotional time and energy. And Ali, I'll segue this, and I want your thoughts, because, you're part of the TV end, and this was part of my frustration as a writer with more of the printed word back when I was at MLB.com. But I would have, whether it was Don Mattingly, whether it was Jack McKeon or Mike Redman or whoever was the manager at the time, Freddie Gonzalez, he always tried to, after a little pregame scrum there in the dugout, after even asking the basics, is this guy hurt? How's this guy doing? May rehash the night before. Invariably, there'd be something that come up. It might be like, if I were there every day, that day on the intentional walk, not touching the base, is something I would have been talking to Skip about probably for 3 or 4 days, because things come up. He would bring up an anecdote. He would do this. And it's not to beat the head of the player for the mess up. It's you try to decipher it, break it down. But point is, I'm an in the weeds guy. I'm the game inside the game is what I care about in baseball. And I'm a baseball family. Behind me, baseball photos. There's me holding the trophy from '03. There's Jack McKeon, which my wife got to me got Jack to sign something for me for my birthday. Tom Seaver was my favorite player growing up. Over here, you have Joe Namath playing catch, I think, with Tom Seaver. But baseball is, in sports in general, big part of my life. I invested more. I expect, and I understood. I had at MLB.com one of 30 beat jobs. I better be damn good, because it's 30. You as a player, 30 teams. If you're a manager, 30 teams. You always knew the bar has to be here. So, back to the pregame scrums, I'm talking, it might be Mattingly. Hey, Donnie, talk about this. And he may bring something up, either anecdotally as a player, and we're diving in. But you see the TV people behind you sighing, can't wait to change the topic to, what do you like to do in Seattle? Do you like to throw fish in the market? Point being is, everything was not the game. Everything was the Dodger dog. Everything is Bernie Brewer goes down the slide. We know Bernie Brewer goes down the slide. And every year, Bally Sports will have whoever's there will be going down the slide. But if you talk baseball, if you talk inside baseball, which gets to the point of you don't miss first base, there's a basic understanding that is frowned upon, because we're looking for the casual fan. We're looking for this. We're looking for that. But old man Joe wanting to talk inside baseball. No, 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 no. We don't want to hear that. And just kind of your thoughts. What responsibility do the broadcasters have to this?
Well, listen, I mean, they're everybody has different responsibilities. I certainly understand the TV side of it, and I mean that's who I was as a broadcaster. I mean, if anybody knows me, whether it was in Chicago or here in Miami, I'm a very passionate, very loyal, very fun-loving. Excited. I love to see success. I loved it when our Marlins would win. I didn't care what our record was. I got scolded a few times for probably being a little too over the top, too excited. And that's what I tend to do. Is I love to see our players play well and succeed and win on the field. And that's the passion. That's the passion that you have to broadcast this game with. That's the passion you have to manage it with. It's the passion that you possess for understanding what you were looking for that day and what you were looking to get out of whatever that story might be, whether it was a success story or a kid who was struggling or whatever it might be. We've honed in on it pretty well, Joe. I mean, it really just does come down to that simple understanding that we've gotten so sped up, not just in baseball, but in society and in the world. We're moving so quick and so fast, and we need our answers, and we need the information, and we need the download, and we need this, and we got to get it out, and we got to blast it, and we got to do all these other things that we've truly gotten away from the joy and the love of what baseball is supposed to be about. I'm not using it as an example to make my point, but I kind of am. I knew about halfway through my career when the conversation started about speeding up the game of baseball. We need to put a clock in. You guys are taking too much time. Get in the box. The pitchers walking around the mound, human rain delay, Steve Traxel, great guys that were just dissecting the game in the moment. And they were, going through their thoughts in their mind, the Rolodex, everything's spinning, everything's moving. And the game was being played in its purest form, whether you liked it or you're not. I mean, there were other things that were affecting the sport at the time. I mean, we had PEDs affecting it. I mean, all sorts of crazy stuff going on. But the game itself was competitive. It was go get it. Guys were playing like I may not be in the starting lineup tomorrow, which motivated them. You know what I mean? It was always like I don't want to lose my job. I don't want to get Wally pipped. Wherever you want to go with that. But the key ingredient, even through my run, which I'm glad I got to experience because it is who I am and it is what brings out the best in me, was the passion for the game, was for the love of the game. I mean, that's just really it. And it's as simple as saying, I just don't think there's as much love in the game or for the game as there was in the previous 100 years or so. You know what I mean? And that's just where I'm at. When you realize that love is there, that I'm going to do whatever I have to do today to win a baseball game, that was always the mindset that fans rallied behind. That's what excited people. That's what made people find and become loyal to utility players who got 45 starts a year, who went out, hit 230, but you knew the day that they started that they were going to play that game like it was the seventh game of the World Series and that they were getting a start. And so that was always an appreciation and a sense that you had. And that was what made a team great. Not everybody gets 156 starts a year. 8 guys don't just start 156. We always understood you got to have great, role players, bench players, guys who come in who put the pressure on the guys in front of them or who get hot. I think back to Dusty Baker. That was one of the best things that he ever was as a manager, was he knew how to manage the whole clubhouse, not just his starters. He didn't just have stacked lineups with guys who he didn't just write in the same lineup every day. Dusty knew his guys. He knew how to plan. He knew how to see forward and see, how do I put my role players in the best places for them to succeed? He wasn't just trying to cater to, his superstar. And so when you feel that, because let me remind everybody, superstars make up less than 5% of your sport.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So
of course.
Do you think it's more, and guess who needs the least amount of coaching? the superstar.
Well, ideally, the superstar.
They need the least amount of coaching. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, just get out of the way, right?
That responsibility, it's what Tommy Lasorda did so well. God love him. I mean, that's what he was. He loved his stars, but he kidded with his stars. He coached the rest of the team. You see what I'm saying? It's like,
yeah,
you understood that. And that's the love affair that baseball has been. That's what made baseball America's pastime. And that's what it no longer is that we've lost our great love.
Yeah. And we're going to have to get out of here in a minute because we can't top an hour. That's the way the app is.
We got to be faster. We got to be much quicker, right?
So we got to kind of wrap it up here. But I think my closing thoughts, Holly, are whatever you do. And again, we want. That's the thing, and why our passion. I hope the audience doesn't misconstrue. The passion is to grow this, and the message I have for the young players who follow and who we bring attention to here on our channel is to be a student of the game. Just kind of learn about it, learn the rules, learn because the rules give you a competitive edge. You know, it's like if you knew something that someone else didn't know, you could exploit that. You might, catch a guy who may have done something on the field, may have moved towards second base, rounding it when he didn't mean to at first on that overthrow, and tag the guy out, and the umpire may have seen that and given you the benefit of the doubt. You may steal an out there. There's all sorts of things. So please study the game more. Don't get so caught up in only the hard metric numbers, the tool things that you throw the ball super hard, your spin rate's good, your exit velocity is good, and your launch angle is good. Everything kind of comes down to those four. If you're a hitter, everything revolves around. There are others, but it's your launch angle and your exit velo. It's going to define 90% of where they're looking at. If you're a pitcher, your spin rate and your velo is going to kind of do it. So there's so much more that could bring you into the sport. Holly, real quick, in less than a minute.
Those things are good. Listen, I've said this from the very beginning when it started, and I was in the middle of my career when the numbers started coming at us heavy and hard. All of that stuff can be used to make your game better, but it can't become the standard of who you are and how you're going to be defined. Play with your heart, play with your soul, go out there and give it everything you've got. Use all of that information. But when you get on the ball field, play. That's the great gift. One time, I remember, and I'll tell the story real quick because I always remember it. I think I was in like 6th grade. We were doing a report on what we were going to be when we got older, right, Joe? We all did one of these in school, right?
Yep.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, a ball player.
And I did my report on the word play because I knew in my heart all I wanted to do was whatever it was, whether it was football or baseball, I wanted to play. And I love to play. That's where my heart pops out of my chest. And that's where I get excited. And that's what I wanted to do. And so I knew in my heart, whatever it was, it involved the word play. We've gotten away from the game, or gotten away from the word play in a lot of ways, because it's a word that defines who we are, what we stand for, how much passion we play for, how much we care, how much anger we get inside of ourselves when things aren't going our way, and what's going to drive us to go back and find that success. Those are absolute key ingredients. Don't get so hung up on all the numbers and all of the stuff and all the exit velocities. It has value, absolutely has value. I stand by that. It has its place, but it cannot be running the game.
No doubt, and great words to end it on. And play with passion, and everyone learn the fundamentals to the basics, right? That's right. 99% of it. Your ability will carry you because talent rises. Again, thanks to Todd Hollandsworth. Hey, follow the channel. I know I'm doing a lot of football right now on the channel, but baseball is starting up, and I'm going to have some baseball mixed in with football as we grow this. And we'll be talking football as well, and we're going to dive into everything that touches us. Todd Hollandsworth, thank you. Our audience, thank you. Everyone, please like and subscribe to the channel, and we will catch everyone in the next